Finally, over 2 years since the first film was released back in 2021, we have Denis Villeneuve's follow-up to his adaptation of Dune. Now, I wasn't a massive fan of Part 1. I thought that as well made as it was, it lacked a lot of things that I tend to look for in a movie, but I'm super stoked to say that Part 2 is superior in more or less every way. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it, and despite it being nearly 3 hours long, it just sped by super quickly. I mean, to get the obvious out of the way, this movie looks great. Its high budget clearly shows and makes use of a lot of CGI that seamlessly blends into the world. The cinematography is also a standout, with so many shots that could easily be posters in and of themselves. Since most of this takes place on Arrakis, the film is obviously pretty orange, but Villeneuve manages to not make it feel boring or repetitive. We get different tones from the sand depending on location and the time of day, and colour is used super effectively when we get to see other planets like the Harkonnens' homeworld, which is almost monochrome in how little life there is there. Hans Zimmer tones the score down a tad in this one compared to Part 1, and I think it's better for it. We still get all the emotional cues and impactful stings of electric guitar and the like, but far fewer uses of the typical woman singing "yeah" whenever there's a shot of a desert or something. I liked the score for Dune well enough, but always thought that touch was distractingly funny at best and an insensitive cliche at worst. It always reminded me of that meme of the cowboy screaming in the sky, but hey, it seems like Hans thought so too since he uses it way less here. As you'd expect, the world building is still pretty incredible, making for a good chunk of Dune's appeal. The whole story is complex and super detailed, always making me feel like I'm seeing something new. And without going into spoilers, the finale in this does feel earned, in a way it never did in the David Lynch version. The 1984 film suffered from trying to do too much in too little time, but having nearly 3 hours to not only flesh out these characters, but the latter half of the story, makes for a final showdown that comes off as a natural culmination of the events we've seen. I believe that this is how these events would come to pass, which is more than I can say for the original. But what I think makes this work as well as it does is how it builds from Part 1. Remember that this isn't a sequel, but a continuation of the same story, so it benefits from the groundwork its predecessor had laid out. My main criticism of Dune 1 was that despite its technical achievements and captivating world building, the people felt hollow and lacked the personality I think they deserved. Part 2 slows things down, and now that the story doesn't have to worry about setting things up, it's free to work on developing the characters. And hey, it works because everyone actually feels like people now. I always thought that the cast of the first film were like a series of cardboard cutouts of various A-list celebrities. Sure, it was cool to see all these names on the poster, but I never saw their characters through the famous person playing them. It felt like a mistake to put so many high-caliber actors in here as it distracted from the central story, but now, with far more time dedicated to their nuances and desires, everyone feels not only like a genuine person, but clearly distinct from each other. This time, I feel like I'd be able to tell if someone did something out of character, which is always a good thing. Given that he's our protagonist, it makes sense to give Paul a lot more agency in the story this time. Part 1 had him more of a passive observer. He was kind of thrown into the story because of everything that happened to his father. Now he has much more time to shine. Despite still having a large cast of characters, Paul is obviously the focus. He has depth and a clear motivation, which is really apparent thanks to what I think might be Timothée Chalamet's best performance. He does a great job of showcasing his character's growth from a nervous young man into a messiah and a war hero. He has pure intentions, but occasionally he lets a glimpse of his ego show. Given that she didn't show up until the very end of the first film, we obviously see more of Chani in this one, and how her relationship with Paul not only affects the pair, but the whole Fremen party. The two clearly care for each other, and the way their romance progresses feels really natural, which is pretty refreshing in modern cinema. I always get the sense that romantic interest is rather forced in recent movies, so it's nice to actually see a pair of actors with chemistry. The side characters that return from Part 1 are mostly expanded upon, giving us far more to connect with, or even detest, depending on the character. Stilgar is great in this, and Javier Bardem brings a humorous and lovable side to the character. We get to spend more time with Gurney, with his relationship with Paul feeling deeper than before, because I found in Dune 2021, Paul had more of a connection with Duncan, so it was nice to see the dynamic between two people who've known each other their whole lives. Even villains like the Baron are more interesting characters here, because even though they try to present themselves as big and intimidating, they're all really quite insecure. Considering though that I thought part 1 was too busy and had too many characters going on, I was a little nervous seeing the trailer for this one and realizing that we not only have to introduce more characters, but they're also played by a bunch of celebrities. In the final product, it turns out I had nothing to worry about. I'm assuming Villeneuve took feedback from the first film on board and sought to make these people feel fully fleshed out. Florence Pugh and Christopher Walken actually slot in really nicely into this world and gave some pretty solid performances. Even Anya Taylor-Joy makes a brief cameo appearance, and I didn't mind it. But the standout in this movie is definitely Austin Butler. He has the same pale skin and bald head as the other Harkonnens, but exudes something completely different at the same time, which is kind of necessary for his character. He brings a certain physicality to the role and behaves rather like an animal at times, making him unpredictable and borderline psychotic. He's also an actor that understands that his voice is a tool that can be tweaked and manipulated to fit the role. Jokes about Elvis aside, what he's doing here goes beyond just doing an accent, as he pushes his vocal cords to go deeper and a little gravelly to match what Stellan Skarsgård is doing. He does a great job. Overall, I think that Dune Part 2 is a monumental achievement for Denis Villeneuve. It's not very often you get movies on this scale, usually once a decade or so, and I feel confident in saying that this could be the 2020's equivalent of The Empire Strikes Back. I wasn't a huge fan of Part 1, but enjoyed this enough to consider going back and watching it again through the lens of now knowing the finished story. The way this ends is rather open-ended in the sense that this could be it, or a third movie could also be in the works to wrap things up. It works both ways. So with that in mind, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Thank you all very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to see more stuff like this. Follow me over on Letterboxd to keep up with my film exploits, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.